Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is our day 4 of Carers Week, and today we're talking to parents of students and teenagers. We've got 3 very esteemed guest speakers, all with different aged kids. My kids are, I've got a teenager and a little one. Jen, you've got a sort of, would you say teenager or preteen? She's 13, isn't she?
She's 13, yeah, so she's just a teenager.
So you're right at the beginning of the teen years. So we've got another Jeni, so we've got 3 Jennies.
So I'm Jeni Samuel, and I have a 14-year-old son, and I pretty much gave up. I had a sort of an operatic career until my son was born, and then I kind of didn't, but I'd quite like to go back to it. But yeah, and I do a lot of teaching.
And Richard and Jeni, your kids are all adults, I think. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, my eldest is wafting around the background here. He's 21, and the youngest, thing 2, is still asleep, strangely, as a teenager, and he's 18. He just turned 18 this year, so yeah, we're at the other end of the terrible teens.
Yeah, and mine are slightly younger than Jeni's. So my daughter is at university; she's 19, and my son Eddie is 17. So he's in his first year of 6th form.
Yeah. Right. Okay, great. So we've got a good spread of ages here. I think that's useful. So I wanted to ask all of you, really, how are things now for you? Or we're going to talk about the kids themselves and how things are for them in a minute. But I'd like to talk about how things are for you as professionals now that your kids are a bit older compared to how they were when they were very little. Shall we start with Jeni?
Yeah, I mean, I for Carers Week, I think I fall into every single bracket, single parent. So I became a single parent when my 2 were 8 and sort of 4.5. So I have a long time of single parenting, and actually them sort of being used to being away for long periods of time and having different carers, I think probably stood them in good stead. I've just moved seats for being sort of teens, independent teens, because as they got older, I got to the point where I thought, well, I'm not going to pay somebody to come and live in my house to look after 2 lads when they're actually, okay, barring an emergency, they're pretty self-sufficient. So it got easier in that sense. But in terms of worrying about their mental health and how they would cope if really difficult situations came up, and I was abroad or afar, that was a little worrying. And the avalanche of stuff from school doesn't stop. Gets worse in some respects. And keeping on top of them for, keeping up with deadlines and homework and stuff. It was easier but more difficult in that I had to be super logistically, militarized, organized with food deliveries and, cleaning schedules and phoning up teachers from afar, getting used to doing that, so working remotely, if you like. That's my experience of it. But they coped pretty well independently. Mm-hmm. I think.
So now, would you, if you had to go away for a few weeks, say, would you leave them at home? I mean, obviously you must.
Yeah, no, I did when Richard and I think we were the last job I did, certainly. Richard and I were together in Monte Carlo, and my youngest, he was then 17, he was at home the whole time. I didn't go home that whole time, so that was about a month. Mm-hmm. And I just got Gusto delivered, and he had a couple of parties, didn't trash the house. I trained him well enough to clear it up, but yeah, by and large he was okay on his own for that month. So mm-hmm. Yeah, it worked pretty well.
And what about you, Jenna? Things do you feel now that Ruby's getting older that things are changing for you professionally, or is it, I know that it's different?
The whole raft of issues which Jeni and I have talked about at length in private. Basically, for those that don't know, I am a completely lone parent like Jeni. There is a silver lining to that, though, and Jeni would agree with this, that puts us completely in the driving seat where the family is concerned. And it means decision making is then easier to a degree. But like Jeni, my child has multiple learning issues. So as she's getting older, I'm finding that because her issues are that there are issues that affect her executive function in particular, she won't be able to be left. So I'm now hitting a period where I need to find a new nanny, firstly, because my nanny's decided to give up nannying, which is a huge blow, because she's been part of our family for 5 years. But actually, I think Ruby's okay with having somebody new. It's more me, actually, that now has this issue for the next 5 years, where I have to decide or make my way through these quite stressful years, and hope that, you know, she comes out the other end with some qualifications of some description. So I'm also looking at my own future, as I think many of us are, and trying to keep her calm, I think, has been the main thrust of all of it. I think, and I know, Kitty, you wanted to talk about this, that the pandemic has had a varying degree of impact depending on the nature of the child themselves, but also partly age-wise. I think Ruby was hit very hard indeed by the whole thing. For a lot of our teens, this whole last 18 months has been nightmarish, because they rely on socializing to develop their skills. They're also changing hormonally. They have a need not to just be stuck in the house the whole time. I've got a child that's a very good runner in particular, so she just, energy wise even, she just really struggled to function. So things have settled down again now. She's back at school, but it's the career that we've chosen. I chose before I had her, and what's hard is then having to negotiate around that career when you have a family, but also once you hit these years where I think teenagers need us more emotionally, as Jeni said, from about the age of 13 than they did when they were little. I think when they were little, they would happily take love and affection and care from anybody that would give it to them, but now it's all about me. And
I think that's a really important point, and that's certainly my experience with mine, is that my little one, I can leave her with almost anyone, and like you say, they're so open-hearted at that age that they will just accept that, and on the whole, we leave ours with either grandparents or each other. We don't often use nannies and things, but my eldest, she doesn't open up to anybody except me, and if she's going through something, she'll always, even to my mum, who I'd say she's very close to, she'll say, yeah, I'm fine, yeah, all good, yeah, and then it'll come out that actually something awful's happened at school, or something's happened that she just doesn't want to tell anybody else about. And the thought of being away for 6 weeks now is terrifying to me, knowing that she could be going through something.
I think it's important, and I know, like Jen, I found, like she said, yes, the decision making process is easier, and you can be logistical and you can organize everything. But what I think I found with my youngest was that, yes, 16, 17, and Richard will definitely attest to that, they get, boys particularly are very standoffish. They won't take the affection. But what was really apparent to me was that in my terror to kind of go, oh my God, the career's going down the tubes, it's pandemic, we're not working, but is to remember that they're terrified, and the gruffness was just sheer terror at certainly at his age was, oh my God, I'm going to have to adult soon. I'm going to have to adult in this new world that we're in. I have no idea how to do number one, never mind how to do it in the situation we're in. And I think what I found, certainly over the years, and I know both of my boys will testify, that because their father wasn't in the picture, he moved to another continent to kind of not be around, and I had a new family, and that had its own impact. But I was very lucky in that I surrounded my boys with mentors. So they have, in fact, we're going to see two of them today, wonderful friends of mine, Auntie Anne and Uncle Andrew and Uncle Mark and, Giselle, Auntie Wow and Claire, my friend. So they had a sort of set of surrogate aunts and uncles whom they could talk to when they do that thing of, you're my parent, I don't want to talk to you about these things. So I think, certainly as a parent of teens, it's important, because they won't always take the advice from you, is to surround them with a kind of a bigger support network that they can let off steam to as well, particularly because we're away. It's not always possible to get in touch with us. Time frames, we might be in rehearsals at night, and when they want to speak to us, they can't. So they've got someone else there to call instead, or just to kind of go, yeah, these things I'm feeling are normal. And, I can't talk to mum or dad about it, but, I can talk to such and such, and they'll say, yep, that's okay. We're all on track. You're normal. I think that's a big thing.
I feel that my son has coped brilliantly with lockdown and everything. And I've sort of counted myself lucky that he was older and able to get on with his schoolwork by himself and not needing, the sort of constant attention that sort of younger children, the homeschooling thing with younger children must have been a sort of nightmare for people.
It was.
And
yes, glad to hear that.
He's a bit of a computer gamer and a bit of a nerd in that respect. So I mean, he's on his laptop. He'd been on it 24/7 if I'd let him, because they've got there's this thing called Discord. I don't know if you.
Oh God!
Some kind of thing that he's got this constant conversation with his mates and this constant game of Minecraft that they can all get into and thing going on. So and he sort of plugs himself in with his headphones and his own kind of world a lot of the time. Having said that, he is so although he's 14 and he's taller than me, he's still very much a child. I mean, he's hit puberty, but mentally I don't think he's, I'm hoping I'm not missing anything. So at the moment I'm sort of quite pleased that he still plays with Lego as well, so he's still in many ways very much a child.
I do wonder whether this pandemic has delayed some of the growing up that a certain age group could have done in this year, I think, and not necessarily all in a bad way, because when I look at my 14-year-old, she's in year 9 as well, and I look back to what I was up to at that age, and I know she's not, but she might have been if it hadn't been for the pandemic. I don't know, or maybe we're just very different people, but I was certainly doing all sorts of things that I shouldn't have been doing when I was 14, and she seems she seems comparatively innocent, and I'd be interested to know how that would have turned out if it hadn't been for the pandemic, and whether she'll now go completely crazy now that she's starting to get some freedom.
Can I ask maybe Jen, because I know Ruby she's diagnosed with ADD as well as other things too, is that right?
Yeah, ADD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and Erland's syndrome. Right,
because Ross, who's sitting over there with his headphones, and he's got ADD, and I got an early-ish diagnosis, so he got diagnosed with that about 10, but that was only after lots and lots of fighting, and his diagnosis of dyscalculia didn't come until sort of midway through his first year at uni, doing engineering.
Wow, it's crazy.
Brilliant
that.
for Matt. Yeah. Can I ask then, did you find that with your kids with the learning issues, that sometimes the support that you got was more difficult for you to manage because it wasn't actually that helpful? Did you find that as well? How did you find that impacted on your trying to manage the job and caring for the teens as well? Because, we're all expected to do all of this and then go off to work and be sparkly and professional and, effervescent and absolutely on it, because it's a really cutthroat industry, as we all know. And, you're only as good as your last show. So how did you find juggling the sort of extra care as well as working and all the emotional anxiety around?
I've always known there's issues, and it was initially a question of getting other people to listen to me instead of being fobbed off repeatedly. Yeah. The trouble is, she's very bright, so when she was little, she could more than keep up in terms of the stuff that they were doing in reception or year 1 or whatever. But as time went on, I could see how different she was from other children in terms of the way she was functioning. So I had her assessed. She also, she was assessed by an educational psychologist. So Ruby now has a laptop in class, in which she can change the page to purple, which is what she needs to be able to read. She also has had extra time in exams. She'll have a reader for GCSEs. She will, she's given lots of allowances. She's been allowed to drop Latin. She won't have to do a language for GCSE, and so on. Having been through so many different assessments, though, in the past, my faith in the system is a little bit challenged, and I resent the fact that we have to fight so hard for children who have issues, because I think it shouldn't be necessary either. And certainly in terms of her sort of future development, I've also, like many parents with children with issues, I think you throw away what you might have hoped for them, and instead you cope with the reality of what's in front of you instead, and you hope just to get through each week, each month, and deal with that, anything that comes up in your way, instead of doing what a lot of parents do, which is project their own hopes and dreams onto their children.
Yeah,
I can't do that.
It's part of growing up as a parent, I think.
Yeah,
I've totally gone through that myself, and I feel much more sort of calm now, about it. I just, day to day, and just support the kids as much as possible, and that's all you can do, really.
Yeah,
I think, and be guided by them, because I know Ross had, I mean, even after the years of school, and Jen, I really feel for you, because having to go in and always be the parent that shouts the loudest to get what you need for your kid is exhausting. It's just, I've done it for years. I've done it, well, essentially since Ross was 4, and then I had, Bo had issues as well, but they kind of sorted themselves out, and it just turns out that Bo wasn't on the spectrum. Bo was just a very creative person who's going off to do film and TV production at university. So, I appreciate what you say, Richard, about our kids being conditioned to fit a system, when actually it's sometimes, and most kids who are ADD or on the spectrum, to use the horrible phrase, are actually very high functioning, intelligent kids who just are wired up differently. So we ended up moving him university, and I think it's a case of he's flying now because he feels understood. He's enjoying, we moved him from Portsmouth to Solent in Southampton. He got an extra maths tutor who understands dyscalculia. The head of department there does regular one-to-one sort of drop-in sessions on Zoom. I think it's finding the right support to help, that supports you as well, so that you're not consistently terrified that they're going to stumble and fall when you're not around. I think that's what I found about the job as well, is being away and not being kind of constantly on top of someone else's back who's supposed to be helping your child. I think I find that, I don't know about you two, but I find that over the last several years just exhausting. I mean, completely debilitatingly exhausting mentally and emotionally, so that, when we were called on to go and do our actual job, there wasn't an awful lot left in the tank sometimes. Particularly as a single parent, I felt that.
And that's right. And I think that I think we're more than single parents, Jenny, really, because we're alone. We don't have another parent who can take up the slack. Whereas a lot of my friends who are single parents co-parent, really. We don't have that. So it means that all of the responsibility is on our shoulders all the time. There's no one else there.
Have you got parents there, Jen, as well?
I do, but they are incredibly busy and both still work. They're young, so they're both still working, and they don't have the capacity to step in the way that I might need. And so
also the other end of the thing with having an elderly parent now too. I'm looking down I had to have my mum with me for the first lockdown, and 2 teens, and facing the prospect of no work ever again, and menopause and the end of my career, and trying to support everybody financially, just, you know, there's no surprise that I ended up to be quite shouty at some points and drank a lot of alcohol.
But like
you
you
need to cope, you know.
Yeah,
it's really hard to stay on top of these things if you're not in the country. It sounds like it, in a way, the pandemic was a blessing in disguise that you were able to be so present for all of this happening and be able and have the time and the headspace to be on top of these people and to really, really nag. But had you been in the middle of a contract abroad, you know, would you have been able to do all that from a distance?
I think you get good at it. You get good at sort of arranging your day around a rehearsal schedule or, you know, a show or something. And actually, like Richard says, sometimes going away to work is like a little mini holiday because you're not called all the time and you go, right, so I have this morning to do X, Y, and Z. I'm an inverted list maker. I can't function without, look, there's today's. See, I have lists of things to do every single day because I can't remember, I can't keep all the plates spinning without it. But sometimes being abroad, you know, I'd be very military about it and have to say, well, I'm going to call the Senko at 4 p.m. But what I found is I was great. I was super organized at doing those things. Not everybody else is, particularly in special needs, as Jen will definitely attest. So financially, it's a nightmare trying, because we end up then shelling out for childcare or whatever. I mean, I don't anymore. I have to say that because mine are older, it's so much easier. It's much cheaper when they get a bit older in some ways. But, you know, we have that issue on top of all the other juggling.
Yeah, and my big gripe is that I, as a lone parent, need childcare to be able to go to work, but that is not exempted from my tax bill.
Yep.
So that is something that is a major issue. The issue that many people will face, which is after this period of not working, I don't have the funds to be able to pay for childcare that I then don't need. Yeah. And I think that, given how expensive childcare is in this country, I can't solve that instantaneously. So I'm looking for a new nanny that lives very near me, because then at least I won't have all the travel costs associated with bringing somebody over like I used to. And I need somebody who can be flexible and who can, you know, help me out when I need it. And so at the moment, I've set my mum and all her friends off on their network and my oldest friend to see if there's anybody out there that can, even if it's a university student that can live in the house for several months.
Going to Manchester. Paul's coming to Manchester in September.
Oh, right.
So he'll good. He's got his first aid qualifications. He'll be happy for some extra income, and he's going to be a film student, so he'll be very easy.
Amazing. So, but that's the point, really. And also, you know, the likes of Alicia Carroll. I don't know if any of you know her. Alicia's got Georgie, who must be 23 now. Who's got plenty of friends who all, and a couple of them have trained as nannies. So I'm just gradually asking everybody I know, seeing who's out there, because it's the only way to do it, I think. But equally,
with the agencies or
they're hopeless.
I had some terrible experiences, terrible, and this was special needs, supposedly special needs nannies as well at one point, and I was leaving the house one time. I was off on a job, and he just arrived, and I thought, I get a man because that'll be better for two boys, and, you know, a bit of male energy in the house. And I heard him talking in a really horrible way to my youngest child as I was leaving the house to go off to do my job, and I just had to turn back around and say, no, go away. And, you know, my poor mum had to take up the slack then. But, you know, it's so difficult finding the right childcare.
Yeah. But, I mean, even if you find the right childcare, the trouble then is that you do have to go to work and concentrate. And that's something I find really stressful. For those that don't have children or have younger children who have another parent in the house, that life is easier. But if you have to leave your child with somebody you don't know very well and then try and concentrate on being good at your job, that is a juggling act it can be a bridge too far occasionally.
Do you find directors and conductors and things like that, have you ever found them sympathetic to that issue? Have you ever, when you've gone to work?
No, but that's partly because I
changing?
don't talk about it.
Yeah, this is the thing.
Have you found that, Kitty, through Swapper, through your work with Swapper? Have you found that the attitudes within managements are changing in that setup?
I'd love
like
to say yes to that. Like Jen says, I think there's still a real culture of hiding any issues that you might have like this. I think I don't know many people, even myself, you know, as somebody who runs Swapper, I still wouldn't feel comfortable in saying to a company manager or a director, I can't come in today because my child is sick, or, you know, some sort of family related thing. I would probably make something up and say I'm sick, or, you know, anything other than bringing up the child thing, because I think there's such a feeling of, if I make a fuss, if I'm thought of as a difficult person, then I'm not going to be employed again. I know it exists, and I feel it myself.
It does. I mean, I had, so I feel like I'm hogging this, but I had, and I'm not going to name names, but one of my more recent, in the last couple of years, contracts, it wasn't an issue about children per se, but this particular company were trying to adopt the parent-friendly sort of rehearsal schedule, which it's great in theory in some places, but didn't work for some of the tenured staff within the locals, within the thing. So, but we had a particularly, let's just say, misogynist director who just, I mean, and Anthony will probably have told you this, but we sat at the lunch table and he literally said, well, you know, I don't, you know, women shouldn't really be doing it. If you know, why have children? Why have children and do the job? Words to that effect. I can't remember the exact words, but I remember sitting there thinking, he said, well, you know, you shouldn't really want to have it all, basically. And I said, so I'm worthless. My contribution artistically is worthless because I decided to have children and work. And he basically said, yeah, you know, we should give it up when we decide to have children. And I said, but that just removes a whole tranche of creative expertity.
And it just isn't realistic now. We don't live in a world where people can afford to live on one income. And particularly you guys, you're single parents. So what are you supposed to do? Just stop working?
Is what we are. Very poor.
I want to try and bring this back to specifically issues for parents of teenagers and students, but this is such an interesting conversation and we could go on all day, I think. I wanted to talk a bit, Jeni, you mentioned about Minecraft and something else that your son plays on. I wanted to talk about screen time and internet access and things like that, because I think, you know, when I had Ivy, I was 23, and, you know, I was quite a young mum, and I remember thinking, I'm going to be such a cool parent when she's a teenager. I'm going to, you know, get everything. I don't understand any of the stuff that she's into. And I'm terrified by her access to the internet that I don't feel under control of, particularly because I'm so busy. I really don't feel that I've got the time to stay on top of keeping an eye on what she's doing, trying to understand the technology to make sure that she isn't hacking into things that she shouldn't be. You know, I know that there are parental controls on things, but I don't have entire faith that she wouldn't be able to hack them. It would be great to hear your thoughts on those things. One thing I do remember from being that age is that all I wanted to do was talk to my friends, and we would talk, you know, we'd spend the whole day at school together, and then we'd be on the bus and we would write each other letters, and then we would get home and spend the entire evening on the phone to each other, and then we get off the phone and write more letters to give to each other on the bus the next morning. So in a way, it's kind of that, isn't it? It's a kind of digital version of that. They just want to be in constant touch with their friends.
But I definitely think that now they're a little bit older. I don't know, Jeni, what you've found, but certainly the whole phone thing is not such a big thing anymore.
No, to be honest, actually, Bo is surgically attached to his phone and to the computer. I mean, we've been having quite a difficult time at the moment because Bo is natured very much like me. He's very independent, refuses to be wrong. So we've had a few quite blazing rows recently. And actually one of the things that sparked it was because I asked him to do something and he was playing, I don't know, it was Team Fortress or something, some computer game that he's constantly on. And because of the pandemic, and again, because of them sort of being in contact with his friends, missing his friends, his mates and stuff, I said, well, I'm just going to leave you to it. We've had very frank conversations about, the internet dangers, being stalked and all of the bad stuff that happens on the internet. And I said, we've been very open, had open conversations about, keeping himself safe and, my level of trust that he wasn't going to be accessing really dodgy stuff. So I left him at that, but he's constantly on it. And during the pandemic, it was his way of keeping in touch. I think now that we're coming out of lockdown, that he can actually see his friends physically, it has taken a little bit of a backseat. But the thing that sparked the row was him ignoring me and what I wanted to do, because he was so engaged with this damn computer game. And it got prioritized over me saying, can you do something very specific? And it was time sensitive. So it sparked a massive blazing row. I do find it saps their attention.
It's really hard though, because when all their mates have got these consoles and they've got TVs in their bedroom and they're allowed their phones 24/7. I mean, we take Marcus's devices off him at night because I feel sure he'd be up all night doing it. We unplug the broadband, and he's got very little data on the contract on his phone. So when he's blown through that, that's it.
Yeah. And do you worry about the things that they could access? I mean, perhaps not for you guys whose kids are a bit older, but three of us have got kids who are 13, 14. Do you worry about what they're seeing, what they're able to look at online?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because I don't understand. I don't know how to put parental controls on. He hasn't got parental controls.
It's not on the wall. It's on the
because I don't know. I mean, I feel that his interests are fairly innocent, in terms of. I could be living in cloud cuckoo land, but I don't think he looks at porn or stuff like that, because
no one does.
But it's just the sheer time and energy of constantly being on Minecraft, which is a funny game because it's kind of in some ways creative because they build stuff. It's really into Lego, but on the other hand, is quite violent as well because my son tries to tell me about it, and I'm afraid I don't want to know.
The recent research suggests that there is no link between gaming and mental health problems in kids. That's the most recent.
Really?
And some of them say that actually for kids with ADD, that the hand-eye coordination thing is actually, it's beneficial. I got that whole lecture from Bo when I gave him a good about being on the game too much. But no, actually, this research is good for this, and I've got spatial awareness. I'm like, okay,
right.
But then there's also the other aspect of the fact that these days, there are gaming tournaments that people can earn a living, and they can be YouTubers. Some of these people can earn really big money, and I always thought, and to me, it just seems like an utter waste of time and energy, and they should be doing real things. And but it just makes me feel like a dinosaur and totally out of touch.
I'm not so worried about things that she could see, for instance, like porn. I don't mind if she's looking at porn. I have no idea if she is. And we talk quite a lot about that sort of thing, and what I think they do at school actually as well, about what she is able to see and the reality versus the reality. What worries me is that I've heard and read that there are things like Instagram where you can see images of self-harm and images of eating disorders and things like that have been glamorized. It's something that is fashionable and glamorous to look at pictures of people cutting themselves and pictures of people that are super, super, super thin. I mean, not like supermodel thin, I'm talking real skeletal.
Yeah.
And those are the things that I don't feel like I have complete control over what she's seeing.
Well, we were so ignorant because there wasn't the internet. I mean, like the internet, I think the first internet page I ever looked at was when I was at university. Well, I was 19 probably by then. I wasn't 15 and very vulnerable in any way. And I think that's the hard thing.
We were influenced, I think, by magazines, our generation, really, weren't we? And I learned, certainly, in terms of sex education, I got everything from Just 17.
Yeah, that's so true.
And we were, we were looking
or
at
Jackie
images
magazine.
yeah, smash hits. We were looking at images of their very thin models. We were certainly influenced in that way, I think. It was fashionable to be thin. But I don't know, this glamorization of eating disorders and, actual accounts and sort of vlog posts. I think Ivy watches a lot of these things of people who are cutting themselves and it becomes fascinating to her, I think, these sorts of videos where I guess they've been recorded as a, I just wanted to share with you, this is my experience as somebody who self-harms. But Ivy finds it fascinating and it really worries me.
I think it's important to keep the conversations going. I mean, I know I certainly had conversations with the boys about online porn because, they're boys. And we talked a lot about it not being real life, a real relationship, real life experience. I talked about it being, about exploitation, about power and money and all the rest of the things. And I think it's important I would worry more if I had girls, to be honest. And I know it's a very old-fashioned view because boys is equally as susceptible to the self-harm and the starvation things. And I know there are all these horrific things like sort of suicide websites and all of that stuff. And yes, it's terrifying. But I certainly found, we only went down the porn route. That sounds a terrible thing to say, but, and the drinking and, alcoholism and drug taking, did all the things, but, tried to keep my sort of authoritarian parent, out of it and say, well, let's have a discussion. And actually, my younger one was doing a bit of pot and I hit the roof because I found it all on top of the, he didn't even hide it properly. He was sit on top of the wardrobe because I'm short, I couldn't see it. And, we had a whole thing about that. But I've learned more actually about how much he knows from just having the conversation rather than kind of one-siding it and just being scared about what's on there, and I had very frank discussions about it. So that, I don't know, that helped me to kind of go, okay, then there's a level of responsibility from you as well as me as your parent to go, you must not do these things. But he says, well, actually, I've educated myself about it from the internet, and there are certain things I will not do for myself now.
Actually, I wanted to mention about the Me Too stuff, particularly for you guys that have sons. I think, it's been such a massive thing for the last 3 or 4 years. Has it come up for you? Have you talked about it with your sons?
Yeah, both my boys and my pardon me, my eldest son's girlfriend has been on the receiving end of some fairly nasty, sort of aggressive. Excuse me 1 second. Oh, fly went down the wrong way. Yeah, she was kind of targeted on a bus trip, and it really upset her. And they are not okay with it. And also, I'm quite a feisty feministy mum, single mum.
Oh, no.
Really,
no.
I know. But they know we've had discussions. They are a bit evil because they do make sort of, and I know it's done in jest. They're like, oh, well, I make a funny comment. They go, oh, look at that woman making a joke. Well, who knew, and they'll do things like that, but they know they're doing it to wind me up. But again, we had a long conversation about rape culture, and, my take on them was because, at the risk of being very controversial, some men are accused wrongly of sexual misconduct or rape or something like that. And I said, in order to protect yourself and women, just never be that kind of man that doesn't take no for an answer. Always be a gentleman. Just, always just make sure that there's no doubt in any party's mind that anything is other than consensual. And call anybody out on it, and they do. And my younger son is particularly, he's quite chivalrous and old-fashioned. Sometimes he will walk his female friends home at night because he's, he doesn't want them, and he said they do get catcalled, and he said it's horrendous, and he does call people out on it. They are the younger generation, I know they're much maligned, but they are very, very, I hate to say woke, but they really are very conscious of all these things.
Definitely. I've learned so much from Dulcie and Eddie about, about the Me Too movement and gender politics and all that sort of thing. And I think, we need to really listen to our young people and respect them, because, they're very clued up about it,
Very much.
It's quite a different culture, isn't it, to when we were growing up? I was talking to Ivy a bit about smoking the other day. She hasn't tried smoking, and I was trying to talk a little bit about peer pressure, and she was saying, Mum, it just isn't a thing. Our generation don't smoke. It's really unfashionable. We look down on people who smoke. It's just not a thing. And I thought that was really interesting, because it was the complete opposite when we were growing up. We would all try smoking for sure, if not continue.
Well, except me, Kitty. I've actually never tried.
Well, Anthony hasn't either, to be honest. I wanted to talk a bit about alcohol and drugs and things, because now we're getting to a point where our younger kids could be starting to try that sort of thing. You guys are sort of at a point where your kids have, probably, and I want to be cool about it, because I tried things myself, and I certainly got drunk lots as a teenager, and I tried smoking pot and things like that, and I've turned out all right. It hasn't done me that much harm. So I don't want to be a dick about it with Ivy, but at the same time, it's scary. It's a scary thought, the idea of her being out and vulnerable and getting to the point where she's being sick and she doesn't have control over her behaviour. Yeah. This is something that really, really worries me.
Well, it's interesting because that Ruby moved schools in year 6, having been bullied. She had to be moved to her current school over a weekend. She had her nose broken. Somebody deliberately slammed a door in her face, and the school did nothing. And she's turned up to this all-girls school, and I was worried about this peer pressure thing, about this idea that, it's all girls. I went to that school. I remember what it was like. And actually, they're really good with each other, and there doesn't seem to be any pressure, at least at the moment, in terms of behaviour. Whereas at her old school, which was a mixed school, one of the girls, who had been a bit of a madam even when she was younger, a few weekends ago, stole a bottle of vodka from her parents' house. This is at the age of 13. Went down to the marina with 3 friends and drank almost the whole bottle of vodka by herself, and fell into the marina and then nearly died. So it's a mixture, in my head at least. It's a mixture of things. I think it's knowing that if you see somebody else that's doing something stupid, that they would say, I'm not doing that because I don't want to get into that kind of trouble. And I think if you've witnessed that at Ruby's age, it's been quite an instructive thing, because her response to this girl falling in the marina and nearly dying was, well, what a complete idiot. So I do think you have to have a little bit of faith in Ivy that she will have developed a sense of what is a good idea and what isn't. And you just have to reinforce that, I think.
But it's interesting how, I know we I joke about sort of, drinking copious amounts of gin to cope with lockdown. But yeah, I was definitely self-medicating with alcohol. And it kind of then wasn't so much of a surprise to know that my gin collection, some of my nicer gins, kind of started disappearing. And it turns out Bo was kind of like siphoning off, through the drinks cabinet and, having a little go. And I thought, well, okay. But yeah, our kids are the generation that do take drugs. So when I found the pot, I sort of hit the roof, because I'm probably quite old fashioned in that sense that drugs are just, his take is, pot's just pot. It's only a bit of weed. I won't do, harder drugs. My worry, like you, was that it was a gateway. It might be a gateway to something else. I use that as a bit of tough love parenting and go, this is what can happen if you're stupid about it. By all means, go out, have a nice drink, do the thing, just do it with the knowledge that, and terrible guilt trip as well. When they go out, I go, just remember you're my most, the most precious thing in my life. Just remember that as you go out. Just imagine that, you know, you don't want to be the reason someone's knocking on my door at 3 a.m. saying something terrible's happening. So go out, have a nice time, but just don't be stupid about it.
Oh, I'll use that. I'll definitely use that.
It was a Dawn French thing. Her dad used to, you know, she'd go, and she'd go, just remember you're the most precious thing in my life. And she'd be like, yeah, thanks, you know, but it worked.
Jen, does Ruby come to see you perform, and does she enjoy it?
She has very little tolerance for purely orchestral concerts. Would do anything to avoid those, but if it's opera, she'll happily sit and watch because it's visual. I think she just has, it's a concentration thing. I think she finds it quite hard to sit in a seat where it's only her ears that are being entertained.
Well, I remember when my kids were small, they didn't like it when I was being someone else. It troubled them on stage.
That's cute.
So there was this rule that when I took a curtain call, I'd always have to know where they were in the auditorium and just a little wave to saying it's
that's not what you do.
That's so lovely. I think that what I've learned though, and I think this is really interesting, and I take it into all the education work that I do, is that over the years she's seen all sorts of things, and you know, I would have imagined before she was old enough to think about, like, for me to think about taking her into anything, that she would be okay with the sort of standard operas, but anything a bit off the wall would be a bit beyond her. Actually, it was the opposite. Children accept far more than you expect of them sometimes. And actually she's found other more conventional sort of things far more boring. So I think I take that with me, because I think that's why music education is as important as it is anyway. But I also don't underestimate her. I let her decide for herself if it's something that she likes or doesn't like, and I try not to foist it on her.
For most kids, if they go into the wings of a theatre, or they see an orchestra kind of, you know, at work, you know, in the nitty gritty, you know, they're like, oh my God, wow, my two, yours are probably the same. They're like, yeah, it's mum's work. Okay, well, see you later, you know.
Ivy couldn't care less about what I do.
They're like, yeah, it's just an orchestra, what's the big deal? And now they're really, you know, now they are grown up and they look at my job and they know, you know, obviously they're adults now, so they do know how weird our job is and how unusual, but they know what a privilege it is, and they look at us and go, do you know, actually, to do what you've done at the level that you've done it at, Mum, you know, that's, not many people get to do that, and that's really amazing. And I think, particularly as a lone parent, and managing to do that and raise them and keep all the plates spinning at the same time, they are really proud. You know, but
I also think
but they are.
For Kitty and I, particularly with girls that are still mid-teens, I do think there's an element of me that wants to persevere anyway, because I do think it's a good message for them to learn that actually you can still be a good parent and go to work. And I think the danger is that if I was to be at home all the time, that they think that that was okay and that was normal. Well, actually, that isn't normal anymore. People can't afford to not work. And I think I'm very keen that she understands that you can have it all to a degree, but there are always sacrifices to be made. It's where you choose for them to be made that counts in a way. And you know, in terms of giving her the idea of what, as a woman in this whole environment now, Me Too is a thing and all of that, you want them to appreciate that they can at least experience an element of equality, and they should expect for that to be the case instead of how it was for us.
Guys, I'm going to have to wrap it up, because I promised that this would be an hour and a half, but this has been such a brilliant conversation. I think I might just stop the recording now, but you know, feel free to carry on chatting. But thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.
It's been such a great conversation, and I've enjoyed this more than any of them this week, actually. It's been brilliant, and I think we could have gone on and on, because there's so much to talk about with this subject. But I'm really, really grateful for your time, and I'm going to stop the recording there.
Pleasure.